Is it really necessary to make machines think like humans? I think empathy would get in the way of making the decision to retaliate.
I admit, human thought may not be fully compatible with level-headed decision-making. Then again, is there such a thing as non-human thought? The moment computers became so advanced that they could calculate faster than human beings, a new dream was born.
Dream?
If we can create a machine that can do advanced mathematics, why can't we create one that can think like a human? The 19th century author, Auguste Villiers-L'Isle-Adam, wrote a book called Tomorrow's Eve, in which the protagonist fashions an artificial woman to serve as his ideal lover. I believe the idea of creating an intelligent being with our own hands is one of mankind's oldest dreams.
So AI is a product of people's dreams, then?
Not only AI, civilization itself is the process by which mankind gives form to its dreams. But not all dreams are pleasant. Some have expressed fears about non-human intelligence.
Yeah, they want the benefits with none of the risks.
Some fear that intelligent robots might rise up and rebel against their human masters, as portrayed by the Czech writer Karel Čapek in his Rossum's Universal Robots, or in the 1970 film Colossus, the Forbin Project, where intelligent supercomputers in the US and the Soviet Union join forces and plot to subjugate humanity. Isaac Asimov offered a specific solution to these fears with his 3 laws of robotics, which demonstrated that while robot intelligence is different from that of humans, the two can coexist. In order to endow computers with intelligence, we must first have a thorough understanding of what intelligence is, and that is where the need for a practical and feasible expert system arises.
So what's an expert system?
The AI housed within Peace Walker began development as such a system. An expert system is a type of proxy program by which a computer makes decisions as an expert would. The program, Mycin, for example, is a system that decides which kind of antibiotics to prescribe. The system asks the patient a series of questions to narrow down the range of appropriate drugs.
So you program Peace Walker to prescribe live nuclear warheads instead of penicillin.
What I realized, however, was that a simple expert system wasn't up to the task.
You need more than expertise to launch a nuke.
Indeed, expertise is a necessary prerequisite, but insufficient on its own. Deciding to launch a retaliatory strike requires consideration of a wider range of factors. In such a scenario, the entire global situation becomes the criterion for making a decision.
Makes sense. You screw up the prescription and the whole world goes into anaphylactic shock.
A weak AI that only has a limited range of knowledge upon which to base its decisions won't cut it. Therefore, I had the AI study the boss's thought patterns, thus creating a true expert system. A strong AI.
You couldn't leave the world in the hands of something with anything less than absolute worldview.
I could have built a simple expert system in no time at all. Say, how would you like a system that decides which guns you should equip according to the mission's parameters?
I'll pass. I'm not going to leave my life up to somebody else's judgment. Especially not a machine.
With current technology, AI are inevitably enormous in size. But as circuit integration continues to advance, they will become even smaller. As small as human brains, and perhaps smaller than that. And in the meantime, robotics will continue to advance as well, to the point where we can create androids, robots that resemble humans. And then...
And then what?
Well, I don't need to spell it out for you, do I?
Don't tell me you're thinking of making an android imitation of the boss.
Surely the thought has crossed your mind as well, of one day being reunited with her?
Enough! I don't want any part of it.
I see. I didn't mean to offend you. In reality, AI is more likely to evolve in the opposite direction anyway.
The opposite direction? What does that mean?
More and more AI are becoming systems that specialize in mass information processing, without human intelligence, thought, or emotion. A machine that has no individualism or sense of self, but rather behaves as a collective, exhibiting the qualities of a society.
Like a beehive.
Yes, it aggregates data collected by individuals and determines how the collective will act, just as honeybees travel between the hive and flowers. The key to achieving that will be networking AI together.
I don't know how to say this, but that kind of gives me the creeps.
But if your goal is to control society, it's the better model to use. It lets you filter data, disseminate only what you want disseminated. Of course, I myself have no interest in an AI without a shred of life to it.
Earlier, you called the mammal pod a butterfly. Not a pupa or a cocoon, but an imago.
Yes, the AI that came before the mammal pod were works in progress.
Works in progress.
They were enough to keep the frame running, but not enough to make decisions about nuclear retaliation. They weren't quite complete. They were pupae. Only when I added the boss's data did the AI take on its true form, becoming a butterfly and taking flight.
And that's why the nose art on Peace Walker was a butterfly.
I gave the mammal AI the code name BS Imago. BS is short for boss.
Huey called that gigantic unmanned chopper a chrysalis. Is that another one of your AI code names?
Yes, you're referring to the TJ Chrysalis 6000. There's also the GW Pupa 5000, the TR Cocoon 7000.
I get it. A hovercraft type and a treaded type. And those letters on the front. TJ, GW, or whatever. Those are initials?
Correct. The initials of the American presidents whose faces are carved into Mount Rushmore.
Then you're missing one.
I assigned that one to the reptile pod. AL Aurelia 8000.
Aurelia. Another word for chrysalis. A pupa just before it emerges.
All of the initials, except for BS, were of Coldman's choosing. I chose mine from the storied ranks of British royalty. MS, AV, EW.
What do those stand for?
You can't guess. Why, Mary Stuart, Alexandrina Victoria, and Elizabeth Windsor.
All queens. Of course.
Are you familiar with the film 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I've heard of it, but...
Of course not. I didn't expect you to be cultured enough to appreciate such things.
Yeah, thanks. Anyway...
2001 features an AI called HAL, a highly advanced system that controls an exploration spacecraft. It can converse with people, and even play chess.
Huh. Now where have I heard that before?
The way HAL was portrayed was truly superb.
How so?
HAL is given secret orders that not even the ship's captain knows about. Naturally, he's not allowed to divulge them to the crew. The stress of it causes HAL to crack.
Crack?
Go crazy. Though there are those who interpret it differently. One by one, HAL kills off the crew until the captain finally shuts it down. The film offers amazing insights into AI, their growth, their utility, their faults, and their fear of death.
Well, you must have found it useful in your research then.
Must you always be so utilitarian? It doesn't matter whether or not it's useful. What matters is that it inspired me.
Then it was useful.
Never mind. The portrayal of Hal wasn't the only wonderful thing about the film. It was full of hints about the future of human evolution. Truly, a film for the ages.
Strangelove, when did you and the boss first meet?
Did she ever tell you about what she saw in space?
Yeah.
I saw the same thing along with her. The Soviets beat America into space with Sputnik, and so America rushed to be first in manned spaceflight. NASA used her as their top-secret guinea pig, launching her deep into the cold blackness of space. I took part in the project as a scientist.
You were there with her?
Yes. For a brief time. We were one and the same, she and I. We sought each other out, completed each other. Did you know that inside every woman there's a universe? And that we are able to sense this in each other? We connected because of our empathetic female brains. As time went on, I began to have doubts about offering such a noble soul as sacrifice. Why did she have to... The flight test was a narrow success, and she miraculously made it back alive. But her mind and body were horribly mangled, and there was nothing I could do for her. We were no longer one and the same. She went away, and I, having nothing else to live for, immersed myself in AI research, hoping that no one would ever have to make her sacrifice again.
I never knew.
It's not really worth knowing. We were ships passing in the night, that's all. Perhaps someday I'll tell you the long version, if you're interested.
That was quite a warm welcome you gave me at the base in Costa Rica.
Sorry about that. But I simply had to know.
The boss's final act.
Yes, by inputting her thoughts and actions into the AI, I was imbuing it with her mind. The only thing I couldn't understand was her final act.
Operation Snake Eater.
Official history says she betrayed her homeland and defected to the enemy and was killed by you. But it didn't make sense. The boss would be the last person on Earth to betray her country. It was logically inconsistent.
It was, wasn't it?
That internal inconsistency prevented the AI from activating properly. Just as Hal malfunctioned in the film, I understood the reasoning, but I had to have proof. Proof of her final act, her true intentions, one way or another.
So you tried to squeeze it out of me, huh?
As a matter of fact, I did. Your silence was the very answer I was looking for.
That white horse the boss rode.
The Andalusian, yes.
How'd it get to Costa Rica?
I went looking for it. It was her final witness. Even if it couldn't speak, I found it and brought it here.
Where? I thought for sure it'd be blown to ashes by those MiGs.
I searched the ends of the earth for that horse, and found it at last in a horse market in Britain.
Britain? Are you saying it came all the way over the Ural Mountains, through Europe, and across the English Channel?
Who knows, really? Perhaps someone took it there.
Wait, the thought never occurred to you that it might be a different Andalusian that only looks the same?
I can't prove it. Or rather, I couldn't.
What do you mean?
You should know best of all. That horse wouldn't let anyone ride it. And believe me, I nearly killed myself trying. The only one it allowed on its back was you. That was the proof. Though I hate to admit it.
And to think, I ran it to its death.
But in that last run, it regained the glory of its youth, using the last of its strength to pursue its former master. Any horse would wish for such a fine end.
What do you make of Peace Walker's final act?
I recreated her thought patterns exactly. It was exactly what she would have done. The world's most empathetic mind weighed the past, the future, and the entire world, and decided not to retaliate. Merely knowing that is enough for me.
So, what you're saying is, we don't need deterrence to have peace?
I didn't say that. What's important is that we wish for peace. MSF needs a way to protect itself from the might of nations. Survival requires pragmatic thought and action. But you must still retain your ideals. If the gap between reality and those ideals ever leads you to lose them, I doubt MSF will survive.
Strangelove. Is that a code name?
No, just a nickname. Don't tell me you don't recognize it. from Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. It's a film that came out in 1964. A dark comedy about the absurdity of nuclear deterrence.
You were in a movie?
No, stupid. I got my nickname because of that movie.
Why? Because you look like the doctor in the movie?
No, that Dr. Strangelove was a man.
So?
Back when I was at ARPA, I kept a photo of the boss on my desk. I was totally engrossed in my research and showed no interest in the opposite sex. Plus, I had a photo of a woman on my desk. The fools around me turned it into a cruel taunt, calling me Strangelove. Even for a bunch of shut-ins who never went out to the cinema, that title seemed to ring true with them. Anyhow, in their eyes, homosexuality was something strange. They were incapable of seeing things outside the lens of their own standards. Being strange means you have your own unique point of view. I rather considered it an honor.
So, you were with ARPA before you came here, huh?
Yes, back then it was really the only place I could make a living from my AI research.
And before that?
I started out at NASA. That's where I met her.
When Boss went into space?
Yes. It was that incident that turned me away from aerospace engineering. Space is entirely too hazardous a place for human beings. That was why I felt an immediate need to develop AI. As it turned out, rockets later became much safer, and mankind reached the surface of the moon. In any event, it was a hollow Cold War victory. When you get down to it, a nuclear missile is just a rocket with a nuclear warhead strapped to it. Thus, taking the initiative in the space race was tantamount to a military show of force.
But the budgetary strain was too big for Washington or Moscow to handle.
Yes, and then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War, and then came détente. Having leapt ahead of the Soviet Union with its moon landing, America shut down the Apollo program in '72. It was around then that ARPA was downsized and renamed DARPA, the D standing for Defense. With few prospects for continuing my AI research, Coldman's invitation was a godsend. It was also a chance to have them collect data on her.
The end result being this mess.
But we did learn something valuable from her. The nobility of peace.
Why'd you agree to come here? To Mother Base?
You intrigued me.
Me? Hold on. You're not planning on modeling your next AI after me?
Not a bad idea, but I have no intention of ever again attempting to transplant human thought into machines.
Oh, that's a relief.
You are the man who inherited the boss's will. You're gathering people around you, even now, shaping them, building a new organization. I'd like to see how it turns out.
You're not planning to go back to AI research?
I never said such a thing. Of course my work will continue.
Here?
In my eyes, the growth of MSF as an organization is analogous to the development of the nervous system. The way you become intertwined, stimulate each other, branch out in new directions. It's really quite inspirational.
Interesting way to put it.
Of course, I intend to repay you for your hospitality. The fruits of my research will be at your disposal. Why not assign me to the R&D team? I promise you won't be disappointed.
You know, that ID card I got from Huey wouldn't let me into the lab.
Of course not. I deactivated it.
Why?
As though I'd let him into my lab.
Oh, you don't seem to care for him much, even though you two are in the same field.
Oh, please. For starters, I can't stand that wishy-washy attitude of his. If he's got something to say to me, he should be a man and come say it in person, not write some furtive letter.
But if his card doesn't work, how's he supposed to—
And another thing, the way he always demeans himself. Every other sentence begins with, I could be wrong, but... Why can't he just do what he does and be confident about it?
Well, there was the thing about his dissertation being plagiarized.
The real problem is he doesn't have a whit of independence in him. In Costa Rica, and even back at NASA, he was always following people around, asking if there was some way he could help. Why doesn't he stop his whining, take a stand, and face up to me?
I think I know how he feels.
And to top it all off, he seems to enjoy referring to himself by that nickname I gave him. I simply don't get it. How can he be so submissive?
So, Huey was a nickname you gave him.
That's right. I took it from the name of a drone in the science fiction film Silent Running.
Drone?
It's a type of worker robot. The way he follows people, just waiting for them to boss him around, is so similar. I couldn't help myself. Oh, it's an American film directed by Douglas Trumbull, the man who did the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Imagine that. A scientist who likes science fiction.
And that's not all.
There's more.
He's a man.
Hang on. I seem to remember you saying he should be more of a man.
Yes. Well, he is an awfully good scientist. Without his reptile pod, my mammal pod wouldn't function, just as the cerebrum can't exist without the cerebellum and the brainstem. He did a fine job of designing it. I'll give him that.
That sounded suspiciously like praise.
It's merely an objective observation. I like people who possess the will to move forward. I have no time for those who refuse to take control of their lives. Until he does, my opinion remains the same.
So, you and Cecile seem to be enjoying yourselves back at that lab.
What are you insinuating? I only kept her because I didn't want our secret to be known.
And the personal baths? You could have left her in there alone and locked the door from the outside.
Yes, well, she seemed anxious, so I...
Now, why would she be anxious?
She was beautiful. I was only admiring her beauty.
She was terrified.
I never meant her any harm. She knew that. I know she did.
But she felt like she was in enough danger to run away.
No matter what I did, if Coltman found her, she would have been... You're right. The truth is, I wanted to save her. But not if it meant forestalling the completion of Mammal.
So you made it easy for her to escape?
Do you really think I am that soft? I'll admit security wasn't exactly tight. It wouldn't have been difficult for her to escape from the building.
Seemed like she had a rougher time after she got out.
At any rate, I never did anything to her to deserve any blame. Is that clear?
Okay. I believe you.
Huey's probably mentioned this, but just to be clear, there's a limit to the parts we can produce here at Mother Base. Therefore, I've built Zeke's AI using memory boards you pulled from other AI weapons.
Will that work?
In the human brain, individual functions are spread across multiple regions. The same is true of AI. Multiple parts sharing the same function interlink to strengthen that function. For example, the more sensor memory boards you have, the greater Zeke's search and detect capabilities will be. Install more movement boards, and you'll increase its mobility.
Meaning the AI's capabilities change depending on how much memory we give it?
Exactly. The more boards you install, the more powerful a function will be. I'd better fill you in on Zeke's speech synthesis system.
Speech synthesis system?
Humans speak for the conventional weapons they wield, but an autonomous AI weapon is a different story. If the AI can't communicate with surrounding forces, how can they function as a unit?
True. Verbal communication is critical on the battlefield.
Thus, an AI weapon requires a dedicated system to produce speech. To be precise, though, only Peace Walker was capable of self-generated speech. All the other AI simply repeat preset messages depending on the situation. Zeke is no different. However, you do have the ability to set those messages as you please. To create a message, go to the Extras menu, and then select Edit Mode.
You thought of everything.
You can even have it sing, too.
Sing?
Song can be a very valuable asset. I realized that at the lake. Naturally, Zeke's AI doesn't allow for it to perform original compositions. It can only play back recordings provided to it. I doubt you're much of a composer, Snake. But you could always have a go at the lyrics.
She told me everything. Why did she open her heart to me like that? At the time, I couldn't understand it. But now, I think I do. Snake, she wanted you to know the truth. She chose me to tell you. That's why she saved my life. I've lied to you so many times, but not this time. My orders from the government were to obtain the legacy and to eliminate everyone who knew the truth about what happened. In other words, I'm supposed to kill you. But I can't do it. Not because we loved each other, and not because you saved my life, but because I made a promise to the boss. And I intend to keep it. I just wanted you to know. And you have to live. Snake, listen to me. She didn't betray the United States. No, far from it. She was a hero who died for her country. She carried out her mission knowing full well what was going to happen. Self-sacrifice, because that was her duty. The boss's defection was a ruse set up by the U.S. government. It was all a big drama staged by Washington so they could get their hands on the philosopher's legacy. And the boss was the star of the show. They planned it so that they could get the legacy that Colonel Volgan inherited and destroy the Shagohod at the same time. Only a legendary hero like the boss could have earned Volgan's trust. Finding out where the philosopher's legacy was hidden was to be her greatest mission. Everything was going according to plan. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. Colonel Volgan fired an American-made nuclear warhead at Sokolov's research facility. Khrushchev demanded that the U.S. government provide proof that it wasn't involved. They couldn't just abort the operation to steal the legacy. So the operation itself was greatly expanded and revised. The authorities in Washington knew that in order to prove its innocence, they'd have to get rid of the boss, and that one of their own would have to do the job. The public couldn't be allowed to find out about it, not ever. This, they concluded, would be the best way to keep the whole thing under wraps. The boss wouldn't be allowed to come back home alive, and she wouldn't be allowed to kill herself. Her life would be ended by her most beloved disciple. That was the way the government wanted it. That was the mission she was given, and she had no choice but to carry it out. Her death, at your hands, was a duty she had to fulfill. Out of duty, she turned her back on her own comrades. A lesser woman would have been crushed by such a burden. The taint of disgrace will follow her to her grave. Future generations will revile her. In America, as a despicable traitor with no sense of honor. And in Russia, as a monster who unleashed a nuclear catastrophe. She will go down in official history as a war criminal. And no one will ever understand her. That was her final mission. And like a true soldier, she saw it through to the end. But I think she wanted you, of all people, to know the truth. She wanted to live on in your memory, not as a soldier, but as a woman. But she was forbidden to tell you herself. And that's why she told me. Snake, history will never know what she did. No one will ever learn the truth. Her story, her debriefing, will endure only in your heart. Everything she did, she did for her country. She sacrificed her life and her honor for her native land. She was a real hero. She was a true patriot. Hello, Snake. It's been a while, hasn't it? I hear you've been causing quite the ruckus in Nicaragua. Nothing much to report from my end. The legacy's being put to good use. Or so they tell me. But enough with the small talk. There's something I need to tell you. You saw the photo that came with this tape, right? The boss gave that to me 10 years ago. I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. I probably should have told you right away. But sending it to you hasn't been an easy decision to make. It's taken me 10 years. Once you've heard what I have to say, you'll understand why. That photo belonged to her. I know what you're thinking. What does she have to do with this? You've probably seen it 100 times in the press already. Obviously, it's of the Mercury 7, the first group of American astronauts, the heroes of Project Mercury. But there were actually 8 people in that photo. One of them was edited out, erased, without a trace. That 8th astronaut, the one airbrushed out of existence, that was her, Snake. Now, why did they need to keep her existence a secret? What were they trying to hide? The answer goes back even further. 17 years ago. It was the height of the Cold War. The Eastern and Western blocs were racing to develop space technology to match their nuclear arsenals. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. The Americans were stunned. They'd been led to believe their country led the world in science and technology. That shock quickly turned into fear. If the Russians had the know-how to launch a satellite into space, they could use it to launch a nuclear missile, too. Frantic, the U.S. threw everything it had into the space race. The following year, the Army succeeded in launching the first American satellite, Explorer 1. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration was established that fall, and Project Mercury with it. The goal was to send a man into space, and 7 men were chosen as pilot candidates. The media dubbed them the Mercury 7. They were immediately hailed as national heroes, icons of Western space exploration. But after Explorer, America suffered a series of failed rocket launches. Desperate, the government made a fateful decision. Unable to wait for its space program to mature, they'd steal the Soviets' technology, at the same time sabotaging their space program. You know better than anyone how hard a mission that was. The Soviet space program was shrouded in secrecy. Recovering that information would be no easy task. Using the help of an insider, they'd insert a sleeper agent into the research institute, or else recruit one of those insiders to do the job for them. And, if necessary, the mission leader would have to go in and sort things out themselves. Someone was needed with experience, knowledge, and superior intuition. And the only one for the job was the boss. The president himself asked for her by name. He needed someone who could be trusted with the fate of a nation. Who else to turn to but the hero of the Second World War? It was June 1959. So you see, Snake, that's why she left. That was the top secret mission that took her from you. But her selection ruffled a few CIA feathers. They didn't appreciate the president going over their head like that. The mission was tough enough already, and now the CIA was dragging its feet. She couldn't get anything out of them. No manpower, no information. Left to her own devices, the boss made a decision she knew would come back to haunt her. She decided to tap into the Philosopher's Network. And that's when the wheels of fate began to turn. The Philosophers were a secret society of power brokers formed in a pact between the US, Russia, and China in the early 20th century. Of course, by that time, the American and Soviet branches had already parted ways. But there were those among the remaining Russian philosophers not entirely happy with the one-party communist state. The boss reached out to them. She arranged clandestine meetings in Berlin, hoping to find a way into OKB-1, the Soviets' premier design bureau. She worked tirelessly to win their sympathy, in some instances using huge sums of cash, in others, by helping them over the Berlin Wall. It was a dangerous game to be playing. The philosophers had everything on her, and not just information either. She'd given birth to a child on the battlefield, only to have them immediately snatch it away. I know she told you that story. If that child was in the hands of the Soviet philosophers, she'd be putting more than just herself in danger. But she did what she had to do. At the time, the Soviet Union was believed to have an arsenal of missiles far greater than that of the United States. If that proved to be the case, Moscow would be free from the yoke of nuclear deterrence, raising the possibility that the Soviets might actually launch nukes if they felt it necessary. As you know, the so-called missile gap turned out to be a Soviet bluff. Moscow had gone to incredible lengths to perpetuate the lie. In fact, the whole space race was really just a part of an elaborate ruse. Only we didn't know that at the time. She used to joke that even she swallowed the whole missile gap story, hook, line, and sinker. She put her life on the line, for the sake of her country, to prevent nuclear war. And it was because of her sacrificial efforts that America succeeded in placing a sleeper agent inside OKB-1. NASA began to receive huge volumes of technical data from the Soviet program. By the end of 1959, they'd succeeded in sending a chimpanzee named Sam on a ballistic rocket flight. The rocket never left the atmosphere. But all the same, it was a huge success for NASA, restoring confidence in its technology. Then, just when the operation was starting to produce results, the CIA came calling. "You're a war hero," they said. "No need for you to dirty your hands with this sort of black ops. We'll take it from here." In effect, they wanted to reap the rewards for themselves. But the boss didn't object. "My part is over," she said. "I don't care what you do with the data now." It seemed as if NASA was making great strides toward manned spaceflight, while the Russians lagged behind. They even got a report from their mole at OKB-1. "The safe return of Sam has sent our scientists into a panic," he said. Soon afterward, the Soviet Union sent an animal of its own into space on Sputnik 2, the dog Kudryavka, better known to the world as Laika. But Laika was fated never to return to Earth. The U.S. can recover its spacecraft from the ocean upon re-entry. But the Soviet Union only borders the frozen Arctic. They had to bring their spacecraft down on land. How could they soften the impact enough to bring a living creature back safely? The agent reported that the Soviets hadn't yet found a solution to that problem. The plot to sabotage the Soviet space program seemed to be working, too. First, they tampered with Sputnik 4's re-entry. Then, 2 months later, one of their rockets exploded on the launch pad. They did manage to send 2 dogs into orbit aboard Sputnik 5 and return them safely to Earth. But the agent dismissed it as a fluke. Dogs, sure, but humans? They didn't have the technology. Everybody believed it. Everybody was complacent. Everybody. Except the boss. There was something about the Sputnik 5 schematics they were getting that didn't seem right. Some kind of ejection device on the capsule that didn't quite belong. She couldn't figure out the reason why it was there. What was it supposed to eject? NASA shrugged off her concerns. They figured it was probably meant to eject the flight recorder in case of an accident. The boss pleaded with them to investigate, but the CIA wasn't having it. They probably thought she was trying to reclaim some of the glory for herself. The boss wouldn't give up. She decided to head to the Soviet Union herself, alone, without any backing from the CIA. By the beginning of the next year, 1961, she'd succeeded in infiltrating OKB-1. That's when she saw the truth, for the first time. The sleeper that she'd worked so hard to place was a double agent. He'd been turned by the Soviets and was feeding the Americans lies. But what shocked the boss even more was why. The CIA's access agent had been taking a large cut of the sleeper's pay. The sleeper felt what little he was left with wasn't worth the risk. When he got a better offer from Moscow, he took it. At some point, the Americans' intelligence operation had become an open book to the Soviets. And contrary to what the sleeper had been reporting, the Soviets' manned spaceflight technology was quite advanced. It wasn't until she infiltrated OKB-1 herself that the boss learned the truth about Sputnik 5. After the spacecraft re-entered the atmosphere, it ejected the pilot, seat and all, at an altitude of 7,000 meters. It was the Soviet solution to the problem of land recovery. The mystery device attached to Sputnik 5 was for that purpose. The pilot would parachute down from that high altitude wearing a bulky spacesuit. Crazy, I know. The Soviets knew exactly how dangerous it was, of course. So much so that they gave Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, a special 2-rank promotion before re-entry. Only Moscow could come up with this kind of plan. With total state control over information, they could easily pretend it never happened in the event of a failure. The boss passed the info on to NASA. It was their worst nightmare. The glory of mankind's first spaceflight was about to be stolen from them by the Soviet Union. It was Sputnik all over again. And the CIA was caught no less off guard. Their ineptitude had caused the fiasco in the first place. The Soviets' deception was brilliant. They'd woven a masterful tapestry of truth and fiction to convince the Americans their intelligence operations were proceeding as planned. No one but the boss could have seen through it. It was obvious the Soviets had some gifted minds working on their side. But that certainly didn't excuse the CIA's massive failure. The CIA wasn't done, though, and devised an ingenious plan to avoid taking responsibility. Luckily for them, a new president had been elected the previous November, John F. Kennedy. As he didn't know the case history when taking office, the CIA was able to feed lies to his new administration. They masked their own failures, placing the blame squarely on the boss's shoulders. After all, she'd selected an unreliable sleeper. They claimed she'd failed to make use of one of the most effective means of controlling a sleeper agent's actions: holding their family hostage. The boss was well aware that would have worked. She told me so later, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. It seems clear it had to do with having her own child taken. She could never inflict the same pain on anyone else. The CIA used that against her. In his election campaign, Kennedy had vowed to close the missile gap with Moscow. If America lost the space race, that promise would be worthless. The fact that the president had no links to the philosophers only made things worse. He was completely unaware of the secret networks she'd used to complete her mission. In his eyes, she was no better than a traitor. The fate that awaited her was was cruel beyond belief. The order came down from above. The boss would take the official blame for the sleeper's betrayal. More so, she'd serve as the guinea pig for NASA's manned spaceflight program. By then, NASA had gotten as far as sending a chimp named Ham into space. Now came a whole battery of ground tests to pave the way for a human to take its place. High-G tests, zero-G tests, spacesuit tests, simulations in pressurized oxygen environments. Some of the tests were highly dangerous, too dangerous for the Mercury 7, who were by then already media darlings. So the boss was made to stand in for them. She could have refused the order, argued her side of the story against the CIA, but she didn't. The way she saw it, her military experience made her a potentially valuable asset to those tests. She felt it was her duty to accept. She soon proved herself right. The boss was more than just a guinea pig. She drew on her experience to give the staff focused advice exactly where it was needed. NASA's space program took off again. At the rate they were going, putting a man in space seemed within reach. The higher-ups at NASA were impressed with her talents. They took to calling her the 8th astronaut, the Mercury Lady. The photo I sent you was taken around that time. I suppose maybe they were planning to use it as propaganda, the world's first female astronaut. But then, just as things were looking up, they hit a new snag. The government told them to add a window. There were no windows in NASA's spacecraft back then. Ham never saw the stars around him. But Washington insisted. Their sources told them Soviet spaceships had windows. Space exploration as a form of propaganda in itself. After all, what was the point of sending a man into space if he couldn't tell the world what he'd seen? Most of all, though, they simply couldn't have the Russians doing something they couldn't. It was sheer madness, and everybody knew it. NASA was already facing impossible deadlines. Now they were adding yet another element of uncertainty to the mix. Installing a window would both weaken the spacecraft and make it harder to shield the occupant from cosmic rays. They weren't about to put their Mercury 7 golden boys in that kind of danger. So the boss was chosen as the pilot instead. Even if she made it up into space, she was given less than a 20% chance of returning to Earth alive. But she took it in stride, even helping them make the necessary design changes to the Mercury capsule. It was like going to work every day at NASA to make her own coffin. Then, without warning, the U.S. received intelligence that the Soviets had moved their Vostok spacecraft to the launch site. The launch was set for the following day, April 12th, 1961. America couldn't let the Soviets beat them with Vostok. NASA was forced to cut short the testing process and move the launch date up. They pulled out all the stops to get it scheduled for the earliest hours of the next day. The spacecraft would be launched from Cape Canaveral in the dead of night. For the flight path, they chose a course that would take her as far east as possible. She'd be able to see the Earth in daylight from the window, at least for a little while. The boss climbed into the Mercury capsule, having completed less than 80% of the regular flight procedures. Both the timing and the flight path were risky, and testing was far from complete. But NASA had no other choice. The boss, for her part, never expected to come home alive. She was going on a one-way trip, the American version of Laika the dog. And yet she went all the same. "Someone has to be first," she said. "If fate has chosen me, then I accept, for my country, for the balance of the world. That's how she saw things. My chances may be slim, but I'll take them. I've accepted my fate. If anyone can get through this, I can. Then, on April 12th at 1:30 in the morning, the boss entered space. It was nothing short of a miracle. First, that she'd made it in an incomplete spacecraft. And second, that her flight coincided almost exactly with Gagarin's. As the sun rose over the horizon, and cosmic rays began to bombard her through the window, she saw the Earth. I think you've heard the story before. It was a world without borders, a perfect jewel. All nations, all ideologies. They seemed so far away. It almost made her laugh, knowing that they'd risked so much to beat the Soviets by a few short minutes. If she'd seen Vostok from her window, she probably would have waved. But the two spacecraft were destined for very different fates. Gagarin circled the Earth and returned to the Soviet Union, safe and sound. The Mercury capsule, on the other hand, deviated from its planned re-entry angle. The addition of a window had thrown the capsule's aerodynamics off balance. The boss's coffin veered wildly off course and began to plunge earthward. The course deviation caused the capsule to miss its splashdown point by a wide margin. It didn't have enough time to decelerate before crashing into the sea. The force of the impact shattered the spacecraft before it started to sink like a stone. The boss used the last of her strength to escape to the surface. Her body was covered in bruises and scorched by radiation. It was a miracle she was still alive. She slipped into a coma and didn't regain consciousness for 6 months. To some, what was worst of all was that she had lost the space race to Gagarin by only a few minutes. That aside, it should have been a proud day for America. Its first manned spaceflight. Sadly, her accomplishment was kept out of the history books. An attempt to save face by Washington. In contrast to Gagarin's orbital flight, America had only managed a ballistic trajectory. Her flight time was much shorter, too. And most importantly, the Soviets had brought back both spacecraft and pilot safely. NASA couldn't even conjure up a half-hearted tale of heroic survival. The coup de grace, though, was the Soviet propaganda campaign that kicked into gear after the flight. The Earth was blue. Those were the words of Gagarin on his return, and the whole world was listening. In the blink of an eye, Gagarin was an international celebrity, earning accolades from every corner. It was a PR coup for the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Washington could only grit its teeth in silence. They decided there was no value in making the boss's flight public, that it would only make matters worse. So they buried it instead, labeling it a dark mission. NASA and the CIA did everything in their power to erase all traces of the boss from Project Mercury. The result was the photo you see before you. Not a bad job, huh? Not only did they expunge her flight from the records, they denied that she ever existed. And that wasn't the end of it. As an alibi, the military claimed she'd taken part in the CIA's botched Bay of Pigs plot to take back Cuba. And when the boss was finally well enough to return to service, they wouldn't take her back. She was forced to go underground. In the public eye, the boss was still a hero of World War II. In reality, though, she was anything but that. She was a non-person, fit only for the blackest of black ops. In effect, she may as well have been dead. Gagarin went on a worldwide tour in front of millions of adoring fans. The boss, meanwhile, was a walking secret, unable to breathe a word about her experience. The authorities in Washington had this to say: "Why are you still here? If only you'd had the decency to give us a nice quote like Gagarin and then die an honorable death, you'd have gone down as a hero." 3 weeks later, on May 5th, Alan Shepard, one of the Mercury 7, made his own ballistic flight. They sure didn't try to cover up his achievement. Of course, he owed his success to the lessons learned from the boss's tragedy. Before sending Gagarin up into space, the Soviets had used a mannequin called Ivan Ivanovich to test the landing procedure, which would make the boss America's version of a crash test dummy. But she didn't care. "I'm happy to be the dummy," she said, "if it'll help the project succeed. Nothing would give me greater satisfaction." And that still wasn't the end of it. The boss had worked through the anti-Moscow faction of the Soviet Union's philosophers to place the sleeper agent, and at some point, the Soviets found out about it. Yet the Americans remained oblivious to the end. Even the philosopher network the boss plugged into never tipped them off to the double cross. That could only mean one of two things. Either the pro-Moscow philosophers had intervened, or the anti-Moscow philosophers had been turned. Either way, it was a situation their American counterparts couldn't stand. To preserve the philosopher's good name and to repay her debt, so to speak, the boss once again made her way into the Soviet Union. There, she found herself face to face with the Soviets' own agent. And who should she find awaiting her return to Russia? The one who'd turned her sleeper against her, who'd fed them lies all this time. It was her former comrade in arms, the father of her child, the man known as the Sorrow. He didn't know it was the boss who'd sent the sleeper. Or to be more precise, the Soviet philosophers never told him. Former lovers, forced to fight to the death. One would live and one would die, she told me. That was the revenge the Soviet philosophers had in store for me. If both of them survived, their child would suffer in their place. They were left with no other option. The boss shot him. He offered no resistance. When she returned from the Soviet Union, there was no place left for her to go. She'd sacrificed everything. Everything. For her country. And in return, they treated her like a dead woman. She was made a scapegoat for no good reason. Only because power had changed hands in Washington. Any lesser being would have long since cracked. It was then that one of her old SAS comrades reached out to her, Major Zero, and so Fox was born. She undertook a mission that, well, you should know better than anybody. You are a part of it. 20 days after Shepard's flight, President Kennedy announced that America would put a man on the moon. Without the intelligence the boss obtained, America's space program would never have caught up. Armstrong and Aldrin might never have walked on the moon, but the Americans' gain had cost the boss her health, her honor, and the man she loved. The word tragedy doesn't even begin to describe what she endured. The Soviets continued their manned space flights, and in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the so-called first woman in space. It's said they took their cue from NASA's long-buried Mercury Lady project. And so that, Snake, is the mission that kept her away from you for so long. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not use me as her agent? She knew I'd never even think of betraying her. I think it's because she didn't want to drag you into it. She probably knew what was going to happen. To complete the mission, she'd have to turn to the philosophers, and once she did that, whatever came of it, there'd be a price to pay. No one understood that better than her. So please, Snake, let it go. When she gave me the photo, she left me to decide whether or not to pass it along to you. I know she was torn about it, just as I was. She knew you'd probably blame yourself. Why did she hold on to it for so long? That, I can't say. To remind her of how much it hurt to be erased. She wasn't that kind of person. No. I think she meant it to be a message to you. She had her identity, her life, taken away. But she wanted you, of all people, to know the truth. Snake, you've probably already figured this out, but it's no accident that I'm only now sending you something I've withheld for so long. A little bird tells me you recently made a big decision. You and the boss are different people. I understand that. And I'm not trying to second guess you. I simply wanted you to know what she saw, how she felt. That's all. Keep it with you, Snake. Keep it deep inside. Don't ever forget the path she took. Because you and I are the only people on this earth who know the truth.
Boss, I'm sorry, but I can't.
Snake, you got a sec?
What's up?
Prime Minister Gary of Grenada is asking the UN to set up an agency to study the UFO problem.
Grenada? That island in the Caribbean?
He gave the press a bunch of photos. Says they prove the existence of UFOs. One of them caught my eye.
That's the...
Yep. The weapon Huey called the chrysalis.
Cuz, this is the photo I gave to Chico. He said something about selling it off as a photo of a UFO.
Looks like it found its way into the pages of a magazine.
But why would the Prime Minister of a country believe tabloid trash like that?
There's been reports all over the Americas of abductions and cattle mutilations lately.
You think that true?
I think the CIA might be involved.
If they are, then Gary could be.
I know. If he digs too deep, he's gonna get himself into trouble.
But Grenada's right next door to Cuba.
I guess that would make it tough for the CIA to intervene, in a sense.
Upsetting the domestic balance of power could cause it to go red all of a sudden.
True. Well, in any case, it's not like we can do anything about it. Just wanted to let you know.
Gotcha. I'll be careful not to let any more photos leak.
So I hear Amanda mistook you for Che Guevara, Snake. That's not too bad, huh?
Yeah, right. I'm not even worthy of polishing his boots.
Don't be so modest. From where I'm standing, your men see you as a great man.
As great as the century's most complete human being.
That's Sartre, right? Well, there's hardly been a more iconic figure of his times than Che.
Oh, he was more than that. He was a true revolutionary and a great warrior.
I'm with you there. Hey, Snake, I've been thinking. Maybe Che couldn't find a place for himself outside the battlefield either.
How so?
He led the Cuban Revolution to victory. That's quite an accomplishment. He could have called it quits there and nobody would have blamed him. But he left behind a loving family and a cabinet post to plunge back into the struggle. First in the Congo, then in Bolivia where he met his end.
You're overthinking things. Che went back to the battlefield because he was needed there. Read his farewell letter, then you'll understand.
Some say he was too idealistic to fit in with the government.
Too many scruples, most likely.
Maybe so, but I still can't help thinking the reason you look up to Che is because you see something of yourself in him. You left your country behind and plunged into battle. You wander from one battlefield to another, going wherever you're needed.
Che was a revolutionary as well as a warrior. He took up arms to fight for his beliefs. I don't do what I do for any ideology. I'm a warrior. Nothing more. Nothing less.
Okay, boss. You're right. Just wanted to see how we stacked up against a real hero. Don't forget... March 10th, 1945. 381,300 cluster bombs were dropped on Tokyo. Japanese houses at the time were almost all made of wood. In that single day, a third of Tokyo burned to the ground. My mom lost her family and home in that raid. She had to move to Yokosuka and live with her cousin. The B-29s kept on coming, razing other major cities throughout Japan without mercy. Then, in August, they dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered to the United States at last. After that, Yokosuka was flooded with American soldiers come to occupy the country. My mother was still in her mid-teens, and she learned from her cousin how to survive in that town, by servicing the troops. That's how she met my father, and how I was born. My father was an officer serving with the government section of Allied GHQ under General Whitney. Whitney was known as MacArthur's shadow, and my father rode his coattails to a pretty high rank. While he was in Japan, he treated my mom like a wife. After he went back to the States, though, she never heard from him. I wasn't born until after he went back. My mom raised me as a single mother. She used the money my father left her to open a shop selling cigarettes and stuff to occupation troops. It was a decent living, but I didn't have citizenship. They're working to change the law now, but back then if your father was unknown, you couldn't get onto the Japanese family register. And in Japan, that means you can't be Japanese. So as I watched the American soldiers around town, I said to myself, I'm a son of America, the victor. My hair and eyes were different from the skinny, downtrodden Japanese around me. I told myself I'd leave this country someday and return to my true homeland. When I was around 10 years old, my mom fell ill, pretty much leaving me to run the shop in her place. One day I found a single picture of my father in the back of a drawer in the shop. I'd show it to the American soldiers who came into the store. A few years went by before one of them told me who he was. I know him, that's Miller. I started asking other guys, do you know where Miller is now? Can anybody tell me where Colonel Miller is now? Turns out he'd left the service and was making a living as an instructor for soldiers in Virginia. It was one of his students who finally told me that. I wrote him a letter in English. I'm your son. I want to go to the United States. Day after day I waited. Then just when I was about to give up, the post office delivered my future to the door. My father sent me some money. I thought my dream was going to come true. I was only thinking of myself. So I went to my bedridden mother and convinced her to let me go. My father arranged for a car to pick me up. It was jet black. When the neighborhood kids who'd always made fun of my hair saw it, their jaws practically hit the ground. I put my mom in a hospital and went on my own to America. When I met my father for the first time, he was living alone in a big house. He told me he'd lost his son, his American son, in Vietnam. He showed me a picture of my older brother. I guess that and his divorce left my father feeling lonely, which is probably why he finally took an interest in me. He'd retired from teaching. He was stooped over, could hardly walk, but he gave me two things: the name Miller and money for school. I used it to learn English and then go to college. America was exhausted from years of fighting in Vietnam. They were waging war in a foreign land, while at home, people were screaming for peace. Right after I graduated, I went back to Japan, alone. My father refused to see my mom. It was the first time I'd seen her in years, and she wouldn't even look at me. At first, I thought she was mad at me, but that wasn't it. Disease had taken her mind. a disease she got while she was young and desperate. She didn't even know who I was. I said, "Mom, it's me, Kazuhira." As I spoke, the sound of my own voice rang in my ears. Katsuhira, the name my mom gave me. It means peace in Japanese. I was Japanese. At least, I was the son of this tiny Japanese woman. It was then, for the first time, that I understood the reason, the emotion that inspired my mother to give me that name. She'd watched her hometown and family go up in flames. Her body and her mind were ravaged by war. And yet she chose to have a child named Peace, with a man who was once her enemy. Japan lost the war. But what good is war as a measure of a country? Since the war and up until the oil shock last year, Japan's economy has grown every single year. It's on its way to becoming a stronger country than ever. I stayed in Japan and joined the JSDF. I was 22 at the time. I did it to pay our bills. But it wasn't just that. I could have found work anywhere. And I knew it. And still, I couldn't think of anything else to do with myself. 2 years later, I didn't have to worry about Mom's hospital bills anymore. I left the JSDF and went back to the States. My father was already dead and buried. I was told he'd shot himself in the head. America crushed Japan, but it also crushed my father. My American dream was over. After that, I drifted around and, well, you know the rest. GHQ made women like my mother. It made Japan's peace constitution and the JSDF. And it made me. I was spawned by war, but I don't want to die in one. I won't die for a country, and I won't live like a pauper. I won't have my fate decided by some family register. So as long as I stick with you, boss, I've got a good feeling none of that will happen. Jungle fatigues are made for jungle combat. They provide decent protection and let you carry a fair number of weapons. Your standard uniform, basically. The distinguishing factor is that your camo index will vary a lot, depending on the area. Wear a pattern that makes you blend in with your surroundings, and your camo index goes up. Wear something that clashes, and you'll stick out like a sore thumb.
Pick the right pattern for the occasion. Sigint used to lecture me on it all the time.
The sneaking suit is a specialized uniform for stealth missions. It provides excellent camo in any stage. Even better, you won't make a sound when you walk.
Ooh, so I won't need to tiptoe all the time.
And to top it off, it also makes your wounds heal faster. The fabric exerts just the right amount of pressure on your body to help stop bleeding.
Huh. Not a bad little trick.
The battle dress uniform is the opposite of the sneaking suit, in that it's specialized for combat. It lets you carry plenty of weapons and ammo, and provides excellent protection. Not the best choice for sneaking, but if you feel like playing one-man army, this is the uniform of choice.
Looks pretty damn heavy.
It is. You won't be able to move as fast with it on, meaning it's not good for running away either. Keep that in mind. Naked. That's exactly what you are with this uniform. The pants are the same as the jungle fatigues. Obviously, since you're exposing your bare skin, your defense and camo index are gonna be low. On the plus side, it's so light you can move around quicker.
Good for showing off muscles, too.
Hey, Snake, I heard they gave you your old code name because you used to run around with your shirt off. Is that true?
Don't believe everything you hear. They called me naked because I went in without gear or food. I had to procure everything on site.
You mean they sent you into the jungle without even a pair of pants? On a halo jump from 35,000 feet? Sweet Jesus, you are a legend.
You're busting my balls, aren't you, Kaz?
Little bit, yeah.
Hilarious.
Cooperative operations, or co-ops for short, is the term for taking on missions in teams of 2 or more. The basic co-ops unit is a two-man cell.
Even a single teammate is great to have in enemy territory.
And there are actually quite a few things you can't do by yourself. You can help each other climb walls, divide up mission roles. On the other hand, if one of you is spotted, the other one's screwed too. And it's kind of tough for two people to hide in one small space.
Good point. But what's more important than anything is how close you are to your comrades.
Well said. Working as a two-man cell can make the mission easier or harder, depending on how well you work together. It's also good to note that if you've got a clear, specific objective, it can be to your advantage to use an even bigger team. That said, teams of 3 or more run a much greater risk of being spotted.
Yeah. In a sneaking mission, the fewer people you have, the easier it is to get around.
In co-ops, you can trade weapons and equipment with your teammates. You can also display your teammates' inventories from your weapon or equipment menu. Ammo is shared too, of course.
Ammo, sure. How about life? That also shared?
Yep. You all sink or swim together. Your teammate dies, you die. You need to be within a certain distance of each other to swap items.
Yeah, I know. I've been in this business so long I can virtually see that distance. Looks kind of like a ring in my head.
That's why you're the boss. Okay, we'll call it the co-op ring. And entering the ring will be called going co-op in. Another thing. During a mission you can assume what we'll call the snake formation. Same as your code name, but probably not standard operating procedure for a guy who specializes in going solo.
Damn right. There's only room for one snake.
In co-ops though, it's a highly effective formation. The signal for snake formation is to tap your teammate on the shoulder.
Can't form up until you're close enough to reach out and touch someone.
Entering snake formation is called going snake in. When you're snake in, the soldier at the front of the line controls movement. The soldiers in back focus on scouting and attack. Just because your heart stops doesn't mean you're dead immediately.
Right. The heart just circulates blood through the body, but stopping it does cut oxygen supply to the brain. You'll be dead soon after.
Which is why we have CPR. Let's say your heart does stop. If someone performs CPR before your brain cells die, you can recover. In co-ops, when the life gauge drops to 0, it means you're in a near-death state. You won't be able to move or anything else. Performing CPR on near-death teammates can bring them back into action. Of course, performing CPR in the middle of battle isn't exactly safe. You're leaving yourself exposed. Even so, in co-ops, you and your teammates are all in the same boat. Don't think you can get away with leaving one of them behind.
I wouldn't think of it. And I'd expect them to do the same for me.
If you let all your teammates die during a mission, there'll be nobody left to save you.
And then, it's game over.
Building trust with your teammates is essential to success in co-ops.
That goes without saying. I'm not gonna let somebody I can't trust cover my ass.
The measure of that trust is called camaraderie. Think of it as an indicator of how strong your bond is with your co-op's teammates. The friendlier you act toward them, the greater your camaraderie.
Give me an example.
Your camaraderie will be higher if you're co-op in than standing apart. Saving a teammate's life with CPR also strengthens your bonds with them. Things like hitting a teammate with friendly fire will cause your camaraderie to go down.
Makes sense.
Camaraderie carries over from mission to mission. The next time you go co-ops in with the same guy, you'll start off strong. But be careful. If you keep taking new people with you on missions, your camaraderie with past teammates eventually reverts back to its original level.
Got it. I'll have to make sure to renew old friendships once in a while.
The performance benefits gained from snake sync in co-ops depend on your camaraderie. It's always best to keep things cool with your teammates. Stand still when you're snake in, and you and your teammates will start to get in sync.
In sync?
That's right. Stay still together and you'll enter snake sync mode. The synergy will give you a boost in performance. You'll move faster, recover faster, and have better camouflage.
In other words, we're at our best when we're in the same groove.
You got it. If you've got a big task ahead, can't hurt to take some time to get in sync. Like I said before, the benefits you get from snake sync depend on your camaraderie.
I hear ya. It's a lot easier knowing you've got someone you know and trust covering your back. Lets you focus that much more on what you have to do.
If camaraderie represents how much your teammates trust you, then heroism shows how high your reputation is.
Heroism?
That's right, heroism. Your reputation affects your ability to recruit new members to MSF. With higher heroism, it won't take as long to convince guys to join our cause and send them back by Fulton recovery.
So, how do I get this heroism thing to go up?
Lots of ways. Complete tough missions, avoid unnecessary bloodshed, and don't get caught by the enemy like a deer in headlights, or you'll never be heroic. Also, getting out there and attacking the enemy in co-ops will boost your reputation among your teammates. Of course, it'll get the enemy gunning right for you, too. But don't sweat it. Be yourself. Be the boss. From where I'm standing, you're plenty heroic already.
Knock it off.
Seems the R&D team's been busy working on co-ops only weapons.
Co-ops only?
Like a gun with extreme firepower, but only when 2 people fire it at once. I hear it's still in the concept stage.
I know some rocket launchers need 2 people to operate, but a co-ops only weapon.
Hey, if they come up with something good, you'll have that much more reason to go co-ops. Why don't you check in and see how they're doing every once in a while? In co-ops, maintaining close communications with your teammates is crucial.
Absolutely. Losing track of each other on the battlefield is a good way for a unit to get itself wiped out.
Enemy positions, orders, distress calls. When communications break down, you get picked off one by one. Now about co-ops comms.
Co-ops comms?
It's a radio system for communicating with co-ops teammates. First, press the Start button to open the menu. Then select Co-ops comms. After that, press one button to choose a category, then another button to select the actual message. So basically, you use different combinations of 2 buttons to send different messages.
Easy enough.
You can set which messages go with which buttons during mission prep.
Sounds like it's going to be a pain to send messages until I get used to it.
Then why don't you assign Co-ops comms to the Select button? That should make things a little quicker and easier. Just go to Select button under Options.
I'll give it a try. How's Paz doing?
Okay so far. Still shocked about being lied to by Zadornov, but she's actually getting along great with the crew here at Mother Base.
Really? That's good to hear.
Still, it's gotta be depressing for a girl her age to be cooped up on an offshore plant all day, even if it is only temporary. I bet she'd love it if you took her out somewhere once in a while.
You're going to take a picture of me? Room for one more? Over already?